Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and the iPhone 14 Pro Max has been out for about a week or so at this point, and it's been my main device ever since. I've been using it 100% of the time with my SIM card, or now eSIM, inside of it, and wanted to share the overall good and bad experiences, from everything from the battery life to the display and much more. So we'll start with the good, and then we'll finish off talking about what might not be so good, and then maybe if you should pick one up, or maybe stick with what you currently have. Now, the display this year is a big upgrade from the previous year. Now, many people may or may not be talking about this, but it's an upgrade in many ways. It seems to be a little bit sharper this year, and also it's incredibly bright. So in outdoor sunlight, it's very easy to see. In fact, I was using it outdoors, and as you can see here, it looks fine. There's no problem seeing it whatsoever. It's nice and vibrant and goes up to 2000 nits. I even didn't have a problem with it dimming down as it was getting a little bit warmer out. So I didn't let it sit for any amount of time, but in just using it regularly, I never saw it dim down, and the phone didn't get too hot where it actually needed to pull that brightness down. Of course, it goes up to 1600 nits with HDR footage and just looks great overall. It has great viewing angles. Of course, we have to talk about the dynamic island though. The dynamic island at the top is something you either love or you don't think is as good as the notch. And what Apple has done is take the sensors, make them smaller, put them in sort of a pill, is what we called it before, and then a hole punch for the camera. But then they've filled in the pixels in between and then just shut them off so it looks all dark across the top of it. You can see in bright sunlight that you can actually notice the difference between the two sensors, but in regular use you don't really see that. So inside it's very hard to see unless you're in bright light and at a certain angle. Now also with this dynamic island, Apple has actually done something that's very Apple-like and made it playful. So whether you're in a song, we'll go into this song, press play, swipe home, it goes up to the dynamic island. If we go into maybe a clock, start a timer, swipe home, it does the same thing and then splits the dynamic island. If you want to go back into that app, tap on the app. If you want to get maybe a media player, press and hold on music and you'll get the media player. And everything is nicely color matched to the album art, to the waveform from the audio. It looks really great. However, in regular practice, it's not something that I find, other than it looking great, is something that I really want to use all the time because it's at the top of the screen. So it is a bit of a stretch to interact with, pushing your thumb up there. You really need to use two hands and then sort of press one hand at the top while holding the phone normally. That's something that I think is really nice to have there, but is something I find that might be like the touch bar in that it's an information panel that you don't interact with too much. But it definitely looks really nice and is something that I appreciate, especially how different app developers have taken advantage of this. I showed this in one other video, but if we go into the app Apollo, which is for Reddit, and within this app, you can see at the top they have something called Pixel Pals, where you have a little pet that walks across the top of the dynamic island, walks from edge to edge, actually goes to sleep, and it's just sort of a little fun interactive thing they've done with the dynamic island. I think if developers take advantage of this, use this more and more, it'll be something I welcome, as it's just sort of a fun, playful thing that feels very Apple. So I do like this, but there is one disadvantage to the dynamic island, and that's with YouTube. So if we go into YouTube and then maybe we play a video that's in 18:9 aspect ratio, what I post many of my videos in, it actually fills in around the I was going to say notch, but around the dynamic island. So you can see it here where it's sort of cut into the video itself. If we expand the video, it goes around the dynamic island. So that's something that may bother people, and I may need to change my content to 16:9 so it's not interfering with that. But so far, it does interfere on all videos if they're in 18:9. Also with this display, PWM, or pulse width modulation, has been a concern from many of you viewers. So many of you have asked me, is it a problem for you? And it wasn't a problem for me with the 13 Pro Max. About 1 in 10 people are sensitive to it. And if you're not familiar with it, it's how an OLED display controls brightness by flickering the display faster or slower. This display doesn't seem to pose any problem whatsoever, and I've heard that from a lot of you, where it really doesn't bother your eyes at all. In fact, at 240 frames per second, it's almost undetectable. So in many situations, it's very hard to actually see. That means the PWM rate is so high that it shouldn't bother your eyes at all, or they're just using DC dimming. And they're also using a 1 Hz refresh rate when they drop it down when you're using an always-on display. And that's another good thing for this phone. The always-on display is something I really like. It's very helpful and dims based on the overall ambient light around you. So if I turn the lights off here, you'll see that it will dim down a little bit more. So maybe you're going to sleep, you've put it on your bedstand, and it dims down. When the lights come back on, it will increase the brightness using the sensors, and it looks nice. It has some color to it, and it's better than any other always on display I've seen. However, I would like some options for this to maybe just have the clock, but it doesn't have that. You can turn it off, as it will take a little hit to your battery, about 1% or less per hour, but it's something that I would really consider leaving on, as it's a feature of the phone. But either way, if you're concerned about battery, you could turn that off. But I think that's definitely a positive of this phone. The A16 Bionic this year doesn't get a bump in RAM, but it definitely is fast. So anytime you're scrolling through anything, ProMotion just seems smoother. Everything is just incredibly smooth, and when you're playing music like I showed before, you swipe up, the interactions with the dynamic island are smooth, going back and forth between apps is smooth. They've sort of made this an iOS 6 experience as far as overall smoothness, and that's something I definitely appreciate. So whether you're going into something simple just as settings, going back and forth, scrolling, going back to music, or just swiping something into the dynamic island, it's just super fluid all the time, more so than I remember in the past. Yes, phones have been fast, but there's something slightly different about this one, at least in my experience, that I really appreciate. As far as benchmarks, it just kind of blows anything else out of the water as far as that goes. So as we wait for this to open, we go to the history. You'll see even after installing certain updates, it's just incredibly fast. So much faster than just about anything else out there as far as overall benchmarks, and usability feels the same as far as that goes. In my experience, I've heard from others this isn't the case, but I see this as a positive. The back has not gotten warm hardly at all. Just during filming this video, it's barely warm. And that's thanks to the 4nm process. You can see the overall heat signature from the back of it really isn't that warm at all. It's staying nice and cool, and I've had no issues. I've heard from others that have had those issues, but I personally have not had those issues. The cameras this year get a massive upgrade, but I think many people overlooked the forward-facing camera. Apple has given it autofocus and an upgraded sensor that makes it one of the best cameras for video I've seen in a long time. It makes it much easier, where you just put it on the camera and then point it at yourself and start talking to it, and you really don't need to do a whole lot of editing in post as far as colors or anything else. It looks good and is much better than previous years. In fact, the beginning of this video was filmed with it without any external mic or anything, and I'll film the end of the video with it as well. The rear cameras are great too. Of course, we have an upgraded 48 megapixel sensor, which makes some incredible photos. You can see a few of them here, and so it takes all of that information, and I don't think you'll notice too much of a difference between this camera and a 13 Pro Max until you zoom in. Once you zoom in, you can see a lot more detail since you have more data there, and you also have up to 15 stops of dynamic range, according to some people who have tested this further than I can. Now you have an upgraded ultra wide, which has great macro shots as well, and then a telephoto. And one thing they've done that's really great this year is when you transition between those, when you're in video, it's super smooth. So when you go from 1x to 3x or back out to ultra wide, it's just super smooth overall. So that's something I think is really underappreciated, that just is great if you're filming video and you want to zoom in and make it smooth and not have to do that afterward. Action mode is also something they added this year, and that works really well. So you can see here as I'm walking along with and without action mode what it looks like across this bridge. I think it looks pretty good. It's great, especially if you were running maybe across a backyard. It really stabilizes that footage, but you will lose a little bit of quality just because it has to sort of cut into the video to make that work. And you can see when you turn it on, it drops down to 2.8K. So you can upscale that to 4K, but it will lose some of that resolution when it's actually trying to stabilize overall, but it does a great job. We also have 4K in cinematic mode this year, so that's a nice addition, something that I don't use too much just because I don't use cinematic mode. I prefer to just film everything myself, but either way, it's an available option now if you want it. Also, those who use the flash will find it much improved, so I think they'll appreciate that quite a bit. If you do use a flash, it's not something I typically use, but if you use it, it definitely looks better than previous years. Now, we also have to mention a couple other positives as far as car crash detection. So we have car crash detection. That's not something I'm willing to test. You'd physically need to be in a car crash. And also it listens from the microphone and senses with barometric pressure and then high G-force that you've been in a crash, and then will alert authorities if you need them to know, or you could cancel that if it wasn't anything too serious. But it's nice to have that built in. Of course, satellite connectivity comes to our phones, but that's later on. So there's no way to test that just yet. But having that option, maybe you're in the middle of nowhere, you've lost signal, at least you can reach some authorities or let someone know where you are. That's something I definitely think is a positive. Overall connectivity seems to be quite good for me this year. They've updated the modem, and you'll see I have 2 bars of 5G UC. As far as the overall speed, that can vary greatly, but I've noticed I've had less drops using this device, and calls seem to be clearer overall. You'll see with 5G, I'm hitting over, well, I hit 180 plus megabits per second for just a moment there, and that's only with 2 bars in a brick building. So 80 megabits per second is more than fast enough. You only need about 15 or so to watch a 4K video, and with uploads, we're hitting about 11 megabits per second or so. On LTE, I would get about 60 as far as the overall download here. So I'd say that's pretty good given that I'm inside a brick building and it works really well for me. I've had no issues whatsoever and notice a little bit faster speed. This year, Apple's upgraded Bluetooth to Bluetooth 5.3. And with that, I've noticed a little bit of a difference. Whether it just be the Bluetooth modem they're using overall, whether that's the new sort of standard they're using, I noticed connectivity seems to be better. So if we open up AirPods Pro here, give it a second to connect, I noticed that the connections are more consistent and seem to have less issues. So it did take a moment to connect. I really haven't noticed a difference as far as that goes, but with other Bluetooth accessories, such as car keys. So I use a Tesla app to connect to my car. When I walk up close to it, I notice that it actually unlocks more consistently without any issues. In previous versions, the 13 Pro Max, I would have to actually sometimes go into the app and then unlock the car. Now it consistently allows me to unlock it even from further distances. So I've noticed that not just with that app, but also AirPods and other Bluetooth connected devices. It seems to be a little bit better this year. Now, before we talk about the negative things or bad things overall with the 14 Pro Max, let's talk a little bit about something that's in between good and bad, and that's the battery. With the settings set up as default and always on display left on, I get through a day with about the same amount left, around 50% left in my battery. However, when I compared it to the previous year, looking at the battery statistics, it was actually about an hour less battery, despite Apple saying it should be about an hour more or the same. So an hour more playing video or about the same doing everything else. That's due to the more efficient chipset inside. However, my battery statistics prove that it's about an hour less, at least for my usage. So if we take a look at the last 7 days, you'll see I had 3 hours and 46 minutes on one day with 3 hours and 53 minutes of screen off time and used about 55% of my battery life. Based off of that, looking year over year on the previous review that was done after the same amount of time, it's about an hour less of screen on time. So that's something I'm experiencing just from my overall use. You may experience more. It depends on what you use and if you leave the always on display on. I personally like it, so I'm going to leave it on. But if you're running out of battery by the end of the day, you may need to disable some of those settings. Now, as far as the overall battery size, Apple actually made it smaller. So getting similar battery life or a little less was to be expected at 4,323 milliamp hours, but it's just something to note. Now, as far as the first negative thing, I would say that has to do with price outside of the USA. The price in the USA is the exact same, so it's still an expensive phone, but they haven't bumped the price up at all. However, outside the USA, it's significantly more in some countries, whether that's due to different currency changes or just the overall tax rates and things like that. It's definitely more expensive in other countries, and for a lot of people, that's going to stop them from upgrading this year, so it was something worth mentioning. Also, some people may not like that the camera bump is larger. For me, it's not a problem, but some people that really don't like it, well, if you're not into cameras, then this might not be for you because it has a huge camera bump on it. Something that personally is negative to me or bad to me is that Apple removed the SIM card tray. Now, this may not bother a lot of people, but if you're someone like me that tests phones, it's just easier to pop that SIM card out and put it in another phone to test out the phone. Yes, you can press a button to transfer it, but I would prefer to have a physical SIM. The rest of the world gets it, the USA doesn't, so they've just put a spacer inside, according to those that have torn down the phone, and there's nothing there. They've just filled the void with a spacer. I would rather have the SIM card tray this year, but I do think that's a bit of an experiment maybe for the iPhone 15. I'm not sure what the point is there, but I would rather have the SIM card tray. Also, another negative for me is the lightning cable. I really want this to be USB-C for faster transfer speeds. To me, it makes the camera using ProRes almost pointless because it takes so long to get the footage off the phone. So when you're using ProRes, it uses a tremendous amount of space. And this is a 512 gigabyte model. And with all my apps on here, I have 52 minutes of footage left. But to get that 52 minutes of footage off could take up to an hour sometimes using Lightning. If we had USB-C, it definitely would be better. So a faster way, whether it be wireless through AirPlay or AirDrop rather, that would be much more welcome in my opinion than just having Lightning here for transferring large files. So hopefully we'll see that next year. And then the final negative or bad thing may be the color selection this year. Purple is the new color, and if you don't like purple, you have the option for space black and then your regular silver and gold colors. So for me, I would personally prefer maybe a different color. The purple does look really nice, but it's not for everyone. I do like purple. I'll probably continue using it, but a different color selection, maybe orange like we've heard for years, might be something that people would welcome a little more. I haven't heard many people say bad things about purple, but I've heard more than normal that I would with even Sierra Blue or any of the other colors over the past few years. Now, if you're wondering if you should upgrade to a 14 Pro Max or maybe hold on to your 13 Pro Max, it really comes down to a couple of different things. Whether you care about the camera or the overall display, the dynamic island, or if you don't care about any of those things, well, then I would just wait until the following year. Usually after 3 years, Apple redesigns their phones anyway, so with the iPhone 15, I would expect a full redesign. Whether that be they make the camera flush to the back, they increase the battery life, or do something completely different. That's what Apple typically does after 3 years. So if you don't care about the features as far as the camera and the display, well, then I would probably hold off. You'll get iOS updates for the next few years, and then you can see what Apple comes out with next year or the following year. But if you care a lot about the camera or you care a lot about the dynamic island or the display itself, I would definitely upgrade. For me, those are reasons to upgrade. I can use them for YouTube videos. In fact, we're recording in 4K cinematic mode on the forward-facing camera now, so that gives you an idea of what it looks like. If none of the things I mentioned though matter, like I said, the camera or the display, just wait until the next year or maybe a couple of years, whatever works for you. Let me know your thoughts overall on the 14 Pro Max or the 14. Did you pick up any of the phones? Are you waiting for yours? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed already though, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.